On the bank of the great Andalusian river Guadalquivir, under the scorching sun, stood a small whitewashed hut. In it lived an old fisherman named Juan and his wife. The sun of Andalusia was generous to all, except for old Juan, whose nets, day after day, pulled only disappointment and muck from the murky waters. He toiled from dawn till dusk. But the catch was meager. They were very poor, but their hearts were rich with honesty. They never grumbled about their fate, and were always ready to share their last flatbread with someone who was even poorer. Every evening, Juan returned home tired, with empty hands, but with an unquenchable hope in his soul. One particularly sweltering afternoon, when Juan was completely desperate, his old net tightened with such force that it nearly pulled him into the river. The old man, straining his last bit of strength, gruntingly pulled it ashore. In the nets thrashed a single fish, but what a fish it was! Its scales shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, as if studded with 1,000 precious stones, and its large, intelligent eyes looked at him with almost human reason. Juan froze, forgetting his fatigue and the heat. This was not just a catch. And the river, which until then had given him only empty nets, had suddenly become generous and thrown a treasure at his feet that all the kings of the world could not buy. Overjoyed, Juan was about to carry the wondrous catch home to finally have a hearty supper. But suddenly, the fish spoke in a clear human voice. "Let me go, good man. Return me to the river, and I will reward you in ways you have never dreamed of." The old man froze, and he, holding his salvation from hunger in his hands, suddenly heard that salvation begging him for mercy. But hunger was stronger than compassion. "Forgive me, beautiful fish," Juan said, shaking his head, "but my wife is waiting for me. We have not eaten for 2 days." The fish sighed heavily. "Well, I accept my fate. But listen to my final instruction, so that my death brings you not only satiety, but also eternal happiness." Astonished, Juan, holding his breath, listened to its quiet but commanding voice. "When you get home," said the fish, "divide me with a sharp knife into 6 equal parts. Give 2 parts to your wife. Let her eat them for supper. Give 2 parts to your faithful mare that stands in the stable. Give 2 parts to your hunting dog that sleeps at the threshold." It was not giving him its body, but its magic, dividing it among all who were dear to this poor but honest man. "And my scales, every single one," it added, "collect them and plant them in the garden under your bedroom window. And wait." With these words, the fish fell silent, and the light in its eyes went out. Astonished and saddened, the fisherman brought the fish home and told his wife about the miracle that had happened. She listened to him with surprise, but seeing the seriousness on her husband's face, she helped him with everything. They performed this strange ritual, not fully understanding its meaning, but with faith that a miracle that could speak could not have lied. The wife ate her 2 parts. They gave 2 to the old mare and 2 to the faithful dog. Afterwards, Juan carefully collected every rainbow scale and buried them in the garden under their bedroom window. They went to sleep, not knowing what to expect. Time passed. After the due time, the fisherman's wife gave birth not to 1, but to 2 twin sons, absolutely identical, strong and handsome, like 2 young heroes. The old couple's joy knew no bounds, but the miracles did not end there. At that very same hour, their old mare gave birth to 2 identical foals, swift and slender as the wind, and their hunting dog to 2 identical puppies, brave and strong as 2 little lions. The whole poor hut was filled with new, young, and strong life. Thus, the death of 1 magic fish gave life to 6 beings at once, binding their fates with an invisible thread. The fisherman goes out into the garden and sees another miracle. There, where he had planted the rainbow scales, 2 slender, tall little trees had grown overnight, the likes of which he had never seen. Their trunks were perfectly straight and smooth, like spear shafts, and their leaves were narrow, silvery, and hard, like steel tips. And the garden, which before had given them only meager vegetables, had now grown for them 2 spears, capable of piercing any darkness. Juan understood that these were not ordinary trees, but magical weapons intended for his sons. He began to care for them as if they were his 3rd and 4th sons. 20 years flew by. The twins, named Rodrigo and Diego, grew into mighty and noble knights. They were so alike that even their own mother sometimes confused them. Their horses grew into invincible steeds, and their dogs into fearless helpers. When the time came, their father cut down the 2 magical trees for them, and they turned into light but indestructible spears. The brothers became the greatest heroes in all of Andalusia. They protected the weak, punished robbers, and their names were on everyone's lips. Thus the sons of a poor fisherman, born of a miracle, became knights whose fame was brighter than the scales of their magical mother. One evening, after another victory over robbers, the older brother, Rodrigo, was sitting and cleaning his magic spear. He turned to his younger brother and said, "We live well, brother Diego, but my soul asks for more. It is too cramped for us here in our home valley. It is time to set out into the wide world in search of true deeds and our destiny." Their small valley had become too tight for him, like old armor for a grown warrior. "I will go first as the elder," he announced. "And you stay here. Take care of our old parents." Impatient thirst for glory sounded in his words. Before leaving, Rodrigo led Diego to the two magical little trees in the garden. "Look, brother," he said, pointing to one of them. "This tree is connected to me, and the other to you. As long as it is green and blooms, it means I am alive and well." He paused, and his voice became more serious. "But if you see that it has suddenly begun to dry up and wither, know that I am in mortal danger. Then do not delay. Saddle your horse and hurry to my aid." Diego anxiously gave him his promise. Thus, they entrusted their brotherly oath not to words, but to the silent trees, whose leaves were to tell of life and death louder than any messenger. Rodrigo set off on his journey. He rode for a long time through the mountains and valleys of Andalusia, until he arrived at a large and beautiful city right by the sea. But he was struck by a strange silence. The city was rich, but the streets were empty, and all the inhabitants, from nobles to commoners, were dressed in black mourning clothes. Fear and despair were frozen on their faces, and quiet weeping could be heard from behind closed shutters. He rode into a city that resembled a rich tomb. Its walls were strong, and its houses were beautiful. But life itself seemed to have left this place, leaving behind only a shadow and quiet weeping. Rodrigo did not understand what misfortune had befallen these people. Rodrigo stopped at a tavern and asked the innkeeper what sorrow had befallen their city. He, looking around fearfully, whispered the terrible truth to him. Their lands were terrorized by a fearsome 7-headed dragon from the Black Gorge. Every year, it demands the most beautiful girl as tribute. Otherwise, it threatens to burn the city to the ground. This time, the evil lot had fallen on the king's only and dearly beloved daughter, the beautiful Princess Isabel. Tomorrow at dawn, she was to be taken to be devoured by the monster. And the knight, who had been seeking glory, found not just defeat, but a monstrous injustice against which his noble heart could not stand. Hearing of the trouble, Rodrigo's heart ignited with righteous anger. He could not allow such an injustice. Immediately, he went to the royal palace, which was plunged in mourning, and appeared before the grief-stricken king. "Your Majesty," he said loudly and firmly, "I, Rodrigo, a wandering knight, challenge the dragon to a fight. I will save your daughter or die with her. Cancel the sacrifice." And his voice, full of steel and courage, resounded in the hall of sorrow like the clash of a sword against a shield, declaring war not on kings, but on the most ancient horror itself. The king and the courtiers looked at him with astonishment and faint hope, Rodrigo began to prepare for battle. He refused the heavy armor offered by the king, saying, "Against a 7-headed serpent, one needs not armor, but agility." He took only his light, indestructible spear. Then he approached the royal armorer with an unusual request: to forge him a large round shield and polish its face to a mirror shine. He was preparing for battle, not only by sharpening his spear, but also by polishing his shield, for he knew that the most terrible weapon against a monster is its own reflection. By morning, his faithful horse, his brave dog, and he himself were ready for battle. He was setting out for the Black Gorge to meet his destiny. Rodrigo arrived at the Black Gorge and saw the beautiful Princess Isabel tied to a rock. At that same moment, a huge 7-headed dragon emerged from the cave with a deafening roar. But the knight did not rush to attack. He stood firmly between the monster and the princess, holding out his mirror shield. The dragon, seeing its own horrible reflection, flew into a rage. It thought another serpent had invaded its domain. All 7 heads rushed at the shield with a hiss, trying to bite and incinerate the enemy. The monster was fighting its own shadow. Thus began the strangest duel in the world, where the knight was merely a spectator, and the monster furiously destroyed itself, deceived by its own ugliness. Chaos, roars, and flames reigned in the gorge. Taking advantage of the monster's complete confusion, Rodrigo gave a signal. His faithful dog, fast and fearless, rushed to attack and sank its teeth into the dragon's tail with a death grip, distracting its attention. While the serpent tried to shake it off, Rodrigo, on his swift horse, galloped up from the side. With his magic spear, sharp as a razor, he cut off one head with a single mighty blow, then a second, a third. Deprived of all 7 heads, the dragon crashed to the ground with a thud, and the spear, born from the scales of the magic fish, finished what the mirror had started, bringing peace to this land and glory to its master. The monster was defeated, the city and the princess were saved. Rodrigo ran to the rock and cut the chains with his spear, freeing Princess Isabel. She looked at her savior with tears of gratitude, and he was struck by her beauty. Love sparked between them at first sight. He looked into her saved eyes and saw in them his future kingdom, but the warrior's mind reminded him that any victory must first be proven. Before leaving the gorge, Rodrigo, like an experienced hunter, approached the defeated dragon, cut out the tongues from all 7 heads, and hid them in his travel sack. This was irrefutable proof of his deed. Tired after the hard battle, Rodrigo decided to rest by a stream before returning to the city. and soon fell asleep. But from behind the rocks, a cowardly coal burner who had seen the whole fight was watching him. Envy and greed overcame him. Thus, the cowardice that hid in the shadows during the battle crawled out into the light to steal the laurels won by another's courage. While the knight slept, the coal burner cut off all 7 of the dragon's heads, loaded them onto his cart, and brought them to the palace. He loudly declared himself the victor. The king had his doubts, looking at the pathetic liar. But the heads were compelling proof. Reluctantly, he promised him the princess in marriage. Rodrigo wakes up, discovers the theft, and, understanding everything, hurries to the palace. He appears in the throne room just as the coal burner is demanding the weeping princess for his wife.
"Wait," says Rodrigo. "Bringing the heads is a simple matter, but if you are the victor, show the dragon's tongues." The coal burner turns pale. He opens the mouths of the heads, but they are empty. Then Rodrigo pours 7 dragon tongues from his sack, and the 7 dead tongues spoke louder than the living liar, restoring honor to the knight and hope to the princess. The deception is revealed. The coal burner is executed, and the king joyfully announces the wedding of Rodrigo and Princess Isabel. A lavish feast begins in the palace. During the wedding feast, as everyone was praising Rodrigo, he heard an ancient legend from one of the courtiers. It told of the Cave of Echoes in the dense forest, where a wise but treacherous witch lived, who could foretell one's destiny. And he, intoxicated not so much by wine as by his own glory, decided he could look fate itself in the eye without fear, not knowing that in this forest fate had very treacherous eyes. He announced that he would go there immediately to learn of his great future. The princess and the king begged him to stay, but the knight, confident in his invincibility, was adamant. Rodrigo easily found the Cave of Echoes. At the threshold, he was met not by a frightful hag, but by a pleasant-looking old woman. She greeted the great hero, the dragon slayer, with feigned joy and invited him inside. The cave turned out to be a cozy room with a hearth and soft carpets. She met him with such a sweet smile that he didn't even notice that he had walked straight into the jaws of a trap, laid with soft carpets. The witch treated him to honey and cool wine, suggesting he rest from his journey before the prophecy. Lulled by such a reception and his own pride, Rodrigo completely lost his vigilance and soon dozed off in a comfortable chair. Having rested, Rodrigo asked the witch to begin the prophecy. "Of course, my hero," she smiled slyly. "But for that, I need my book of fates. It is over there, on the highest shelf. I am old. I can't reach it. Help me." Rodrigo, seeing no trick, readily stood up. His last nightly act in this cave was a simple favor.
which proved to be fatal for him. At the moment his fingers touched the book, the witch, standing behind him, pulled a flower, pale as death, from the folds of her clothing. She forcefully sprayed its juice in his face and quickly spoke the words of a spell.
Rodrigo felt his body stiffening. He tried to turn, to draw his sword, but his muscles no longer obeyed him. A coldness rapidly rose from his feet, turning living skin into grey, lifeless stone. His face froze with an expression of horror and amazement as he turned into a statue, joining the grim collection of other petrified knights that stood in the shadows of the cave. Thus, the knight who defeated the dragon was defeated by a single flower, and his warm heart froze in a cold, eternal prison of stone. The witch cackled maliciously, looking at her new creation. At the very moment Rodrigo turned to stone, far, far away, in the old fisherman's garden, the magical spear tree that belonged to Rodrigo suddenly began to dry up and wither. Its steel leaves yellowed, curled, and fell to the ground with a quiet rustle. Its trunk darkened and cracked, and the silent tree in the quiet garden told of the tragedy louder than any scream, dropping its dead leaves like tears. The life force left it as suddenly and irrevocably as it had left its master. Every day, Diego came to the garden to care for the magical trees. But one morning, he saw with horror that his brother's tree had withered. He touched the dry trunk. It was cold as stone. Their old oath immediately came to his mind. He understood that Rodrigo was in mortal danger. His heart clenched with grief and anxiety. The dead tree became for him both news of sorrow and a battle standard, calling him to set out on a journey immediately. He had to find and save his brother. Diego did not waste a day or an hour. He said goodbye to his elderly parents, vowing to bring their son back to them. He went to the stable, saddled his faithful twin horse, and called his fearless twin dog. Then he went to his living green tree, cut it down, and it turned into an indestructible spear in his hands. Armed and ready for anything, he set off on his brother's trail. He rode not for glory or for adventures, but for his brother's life, and this purpose made him twice as strong and fast. Following the same path, Diego arrived at the city by the sea. But instead of sorrow, he was met with universal jubilation. The inhabitants greeted him joyfully, shouting, "Our Savior has returned! King Rodrigo has returned!" They had mistaken him for his older brother. He was escorted to the palace with honors. There, the beautiful Princess Isabel met him with tears of joy. She embraced him and called him her dear husband. Diego froze in amazement. He had come to find traces of a tragedy,
but instead found himself in the very center of another's triumph, and his brother's fame became the first trap for him. He did not know what to do or what to say.
Diego understood everything instantly. His brother had performed a great deed here, saved the princess, and was supposed to become her husband. If he revealed himself now, he would tarnish his brother's honor and break this loving girl's heart. He made the difficult but noble decision to remain silent and play the role of Rodrigo until he found out what had happened. And he put on his brother's mask, shouldering not only his glory, but also his honor and his love, and decided to carry this burden to the end. He silently accepted the honors, citing fatigue, and tried to find out where his brother might have gone. Night fell. The ladies in waiting, according to custom, escorted Diego to the princess's luxurious chambers. Isabel was waiting for him, happy and unsuspecting. For Diego, this was the most terrible test. He had to enter the bedroom of his brother's woman, who believed him to be her husband. He went to the bridal chambers as if to a battlefield, where he would have to fight not a dragon, but his own conscience and his brother's honor. He understood that one wrong word or movement could destroy everything. He entered the chambers, and the heavy doors closed behind him, cutting off any path of retreat. Left alone with the princess, Diego performed his greatest nightly act. He walked to the luxurious bed, drew his sword from its sheath, and laid its naked blade right down the middle, between himself and the princess. "Forgive me, beautiful princess," he said in a voice full of sorrow, "but I have taken a great vow, not to touch you until I find and avenge the death of my best friend, who died on the journey." He lay down on his half of the bed and turned away, and the cold steel of his sword, lying between them, was hotter than any oath, for it was a silent witness to his unbreakable loyalty. The sword lay between them like a wall of ice, guarding his brother's honor. Princess Isabel was surprised and saddened, but seeing his grief, she respected his knightly oath. She tried to comfort him. Diego, seizing the moment, began to ask cautiously, "Do you know where your husband might have gone after our wedding?" He said he wanted to test his fate, but did not say where. And he, under the cover of feigned grief, began to carefully unravel the tangle that had led his brother to true disaster. He asked if she had heard of any dangerous or magical places in the area where such a brave knight as her husband might have gone. The princess, after thinking for a moment, remembered. "Yes," she said. "At the wedding feast, he heard the legend of the Cave of Echoes in the Black Forest. They say a witch lives there who can foretell one's destiny." She added with a sigh, "He was so proud of his victory that he did not listen to my pleas and went there alone to learn of his future deeds." Diego understood everything. Thus his brother's name, spoken with love, and the name of the cave, spoken with anxiety, formed a map for him, leading straight to the enemy's lair. At dawn, Diego left the palace and set off for the Black Forest. He easily found the Cave of Echoes. The witch met him at the threshold with the same feigned, sweet smile, mistaking him for the returned Rodrigo. "Ah, you've returned, my hero," she cooed. "You must have enjoyed your visit with me. Come in, rest." Diego entered, pretending to suspect nothing, but his hand gripped the hilt of his sword tightly. He entered the same cave as his brother, but he carried with him not pride, but knowledge, and this made him 1,000 times more dangerous. The witch, just as before, offered him refreshments, and then pointed to a high shelf. "My dear knight, be so kind as to get me that book of fates. I want to read your great destiny."
But Diego was on his guard. He smiled politely. "No," he said, "I am the guest of honor today, the Dragon Slayer. It is not fitting for me to climb for books myself. You are the hostess. You serve me. You had better get it yourself, and I will watch." And he returned her own trap to her, wrapped in polite words, forcing her to take a step toward her own defeat. He took a step back, giving her way and gripping his spear tighter. The witch, annoyed by his laziness and seeing no trick, turned herself and reached for the shelf. At the very moment she stood on her toes, distracted, Diego acted. He snatched the pale flower from the folds of her clothing and sprayed its juice in her face. With a piercing scream, the witch collapsed to the floor. Her magical power vanished, and she turned into a powerless, wrinkled old woman. "Tell me where my brother is," Diego commanded, raising his sword over her. Thus cunning defeated treachery, and simple knightly wit proved stronger than age-old dark magic. He gave the witch not a single chance, using her own weapon against her. The frightened witch pointed Diego to the stone statues. He forced her to reverse the spell on his brother and all the other unfortunate knights. The two twin brothers, alive and unharmed, embraced. They returned to the palace together. What joy it was for Princess Isabel when she found her true husband. Diego told everyone about his deed of honor, about the sword on the bed, and everyone, especially the princess, admired his nobility. They held a double celebration. Rodrigo remained to rule in that kingdom with Isabel, and Diego, refusing all honors, went on in search of his own adventures. Thus, one brother conquered a kingdom with strength, and the other, fame with nobility. And both of them, born of a single miracle, found their own deserved destiny.